It took 10 seconds for 5 trained bodyguards to go from laughing at him to lying on the ground, and every single one of them would later agree on the exact number, because counting it afterward was the only way any of them could process how completely they had misjudged the quiet man in the gray jacket standing by the coat check. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 36 years old, a single father to one 10-year-old son named Eli, and on the Friday evening in question, he was standing in the lobby of the Hargrove Hotel in downtown Chicago holding 2 garment bags and waiting for an elevator, dressed in the kind of unremarkable gray jacket that nobody at a black-tied charity gala looks at twice, which was exactly how he liked it. He was not supposed to be at the gala. He worked for the catering and events company that the Hargrove used for large functions, and his actual job that night was logistics support, making sure the kitchen staff had what they needed, making sure the load-in for the auction items went smoothly, making sure the small army of contracted workers who made an event like this function invisibly were actually functioning. He had been doing this kind of work for 3 years since he'd left a previous career that almost nobody at the Hargrove knew anything about, and he had built it into something stable enough to support himself and Eli without requiring him to explain to anyone what he used to do. He was crossing the lobby toward the service elevator when the 5 men blocked his path. They weren't being aggressive exactly, not yet. They had the specific loose, confident posture of men who were good at their jobs and knew it, the posture of professional security who had spent the evening managing a controlled environment and reached the part of the night where vigilance relaxed into something closer to boredom. They were the personal security detail for Vivian Hale, the CEO of Hale Industries, the $7 billion logistics and manufacturing conglomerate that was the gala's primary sponsor, and they had positioned themselves near the elevator bank because Vivian Hale was about to come down from the penthouse suite to make her entrance, and they were not in the mood to have a guy in a wrinkled gray jacket carrying garment bags cutting through their perimeter. "Elevators reserved," the lead once said. He was big, 6'4", built like someone who spent serious hours in a gym, with the close-cropped hair and earpiece that signaled professional security the way a uniform signaled a job. His name, Marcus would learn within the next 2 minutes, was Russo. "I need the service elevator. Different one. I'm just passing through." Russo looked him over, the gray jacket, the garment bags, the unremarkable presence of a man who clearly didn't belong in a room full of people wearing 6-figure jewelry, which was exactly how he liked it. "Then go around," Russo said. "This area is secured." One of the other 4, younger, leaner, the kind of guy who clearly modeled himself on the older operators around him, laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Probably lost," he said to the others, not particularly trying to keep his voice down. "Hey buddy, the kitchen's that way." The other 3 laughed too, not cruelly exactly, the lazy, low-stakes laughter of men passing time, men who had sized up a stranger and concluded there was nothing here worth their attention, and who found it mildly funny that he was still standing there. Marcus did not react to the laughter. He stood with the garment bags over one arm, looking at Russo with an expression that was not embarrassed and not angry, just patient, the specific patience of a man who had been underestimated before and had learned that correcting people's assumptions was rarely worth the energy unless the situation actually required it. "I just need to get past you," he said evenly. "I'm not trying to get near your principal." "My principal," Russo repeated, amused, glancing at the others. "Listen to this guy. You watch movies, buddy?" More laughter. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, not at the mockery, but at the clock now running in his head. Eli's school recital started at 7:30. He had told his manager he needed to be done by 7 so he could make it across town, and he had exactly 11 minutes to drop these garment bags at wardrobe and get out, and 5 bored, overconfident bodyguards treating a service corridor like a turf war were now standing directly between him and his son's first violin solo. "I have somewhere to be," Marcus said. "I'm asking you to step aside." Russo's amusement flattened slightly into something with more edge. "You're asking," he said. "Cute." He took a half step forward, into Marcus's space, the specific physical intimidation move of someone who was used to that move working. "How about you turn around and—" He never finished the sentence. What happened next took, by the count that all 5 men would later independently arrive at while filling out incident reports, statements, and, in 2 cases, apologies, exactly 10 seconds. Russo's hand had come up toward Marcus's shoulder, not yet a strike, just the beginning of a shove, the kind of move a man makes when he's confident the other person isn't going to do anything about it. Marcus's response was not dramatic. There was no flourish, no shouted warning, no visible wind-up. His left hand came up and intercepted Russo's wrist with a small, economical rotation that redirected the larger man's own momentum into the wall beside the elevator bank, and Russo was on the ground, not knocked out, not seriously hurt, just abruptly and completely removed from a vertical position, before the second man, the younger one who made the kitchen joke, had even fully processed that something had started. The second man lunged. Marcus pivoted half a step, used his own forward momentum against him, with a movement so compact it barely looked like contact at all, and the second man's legs were no longer underneath him. The third and fourth came at the same time, which Marcus had clearly expected, because his body was already moving before they committed, a low sweep that took the legs out from under the third, while his free hand caught the fourth man's incoming arm and used the leverage to put him face down on the marble floor with a controlled pressure that was clearly designed to immobilize rather than injure. The fifth man, older, the one who had not laughed as loudly as the others, the one whose instincts, a half-second too late, had recognized something in how Marcus was standing that the others had missed, hesitated. That hesitation was the only thing that kept him on his feet for an extra 2 seconds, and it didn't matter because Marcus closed the distance, controlled his weapon hand wrist before the man could fully decide whether to reach for anything, and put him on the ground with the same economy of precision he'd used on the other 4. 10 seconds. 5 trained, professional, and armed bodyguards on the marble floor of the Hargrove Hotel, and Marcus Webb standing exactly where he'd been standing, garment bags still over his arm. He had set them down at some point in the sequence without anyone quite seeing when, breathing slightly elevated, expression entirely unchanged. The lobby, which had been filled with the ambient murmur of 200 gala guests, went completely silent. Vivian Hale had stepped out of the elevator 22 seconds before Russo's hand started toward Marcus's shoulder. She had come down a private express car that opened directly behind where her security team was standing, which meant she had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire sequence from the moment the doors opened, the mockery, the laughter, the half-step into Marcus's space, and then the 10 seconds that followed, which she watched with an expression that none of her own staff, watching her watch it, could entirely read. Vivian Hale was 51 years old. She had built Hale Industries from a single Midwest manufacturing plant she inherited from her father at 28 into a $7 billion logistics empire, and she had done it through a specific unglamorous combination of operational intelligence and an almost obsessive attention to the gap between what people claimed about their capabilities and what was actually true. She had fired 3 different security firms in the past decade for exactly the failure mode she was now watching unfold in front of her. Overconfidence dressed up as competence, professional swagger that hadn't been tested against anything real. She watched her 5-man detail get put on the ground in 10 seconds by a man in a gray jacket carrying garment bags. She did not gasp, she did not call for help. She stood very still at the elevator threshold and watched with the specific focused attention of someone whose entire career had been built on noticing things other people missed. And what she noticed, what made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition, was the economy of it. Every move Marcus made took the minimum force required to neutralize the threat and not 1 ounce more. He had not struck anyone. He had not caused an injury that would require more than an ice pack and a bruised ego. He had redirected, controlled, and immobilized 5 much larger, much more aggressive men using their own momentum against them, with a precision that didn't come from a self-defense class or even years of martial arts hobbyism. It came from somewhere else. She had seen that kind of precision exactly twice before in her life, both times from men whose service records she had personally reviewed before hiring them onto her executive protection team years earlier, men who had since retired, men whose training cost the government a fortune and whose restraint, the specific quality of holding back 90% of what they were capable of doing, was in her experience the single rarest quality in anyone who'd ever been handed that kind of capability. She walked toward the small crowd of stunned guests, her own staff, and 5 men slowly, groaning, getting to their feet. "Stand down," Russo said, to who was attempting to get up with the specific wounded dignity of a man whose pride had taken considerably more damage than his body. "All of you, now." The lobby remained silent. Marcus had already picked the garment bags back up. Vivian looked at him directly for the first time. "What's your name?" she asked. Marcus Webb. I work for events for the hotel's catering contractor. I apologize for the disruption, ma'am. I need to drop these bags at wardrobe and get out. I have somewhere to be." She looked at him for a long moment. "What time?" she said. He glanced at his watch, the small automatic gesture of a man whose internal clock was already running. 7:30, he said, across town. "Russo," Vivian said, not taking her eyes off Marcus, "have someone get this man a car, now. Whatever he needs, wherever he's going, immediately." Russo, still on the ground catching his breath, looked up with an expression caught somewhere between humiliation and disbelief. "Ma'am, I didn't ask what you thought," Vivian said with a level coldness that silenced him completely. "I asked you to get him a car." The car arrived in 4 minutes, one of Hale Industries' own town cars. The driver pulled directly from standby duty for the gala, and Marcus found himself, against every plan he had for the evening, being escorted to a black sedan by a hotel concierge, while Vivian Hale herself walked beside him through the lobby that was still buzzing with the specific electric murmur of 200 people who had just witnessed something they were going to be talking about for months.
"You don't need to do this," Marcus said as they reached the car. "I appreciate it, but a cab would have been—" "Mr. Webb," said Vivian, "I just watched 5 men I am personally paying a combined $400,000 a year get put on the floor of my hotel lobby in 10 seconds by a man carrying dry cleaning. I am going to need you to let me do this small thing while I figure out what I actually want to ask you." Marcus looked at her. There was something direct and unguarded in how she said it. Not performative gratitude, just plain assessment, the specific honesty of someone whose currency was efficiency and who had just witnessed an extraordinary amount of it. "Okay," he said. "Get in," she said. "I'm coming with you. I have somewhere I need to be tonight too, technically, but it can survive 45 minutes without me, and apparently you have somewhere that can't. You don't need to come." "I know," she said, opening the door herself before the driver could reach it. "I want to." The drive across Chicago took 18 minutes in evening traffic, and for the first 6 of them, neither of them spoke. Marcus sat with the garment bags, now safely deposited with hotel staff, his posture relaxed but alert in the specific way Vivian recognized, a man whose body had been trained, at some point, to never be fully off. "I need to ask," Vivian finally said. "And I want to be direct about why I'm asking, because I think you'll respect directness more than I tiptoeing around it. What you did back there, that wasn't a bar fight reflex. That wasn't a guy who took a few self-defense classes getting lucky. I've reviewed security personnel files for over a decade. I know what real training looks like, and what you did had a precision to it that doesn't come from a gym." Marcus looked out the window for a moment. "Army," he said. "Special Forces, 8 years. And now you're carrying garment bags for a catering company," Vivian said. It wasn't a judgment, it was a genuine question wrapped in a statement, the kind people asked when they were trying to understand a gap that didn't make immediate sense to them. "My wife died 4 years ago. Car accident. I had a son, 6 years old at the time, and an active deployment status, and a command that was very understanding but couldn't change the fundamental math of the job." He paused. "I separated, came home. Eli needed a dad who was actually there, not someone managing him from 6,000 miles away through video calls that dropped every 10 minutes. The events job pays enough, the hours are mostly predictable, and nobody at the Hargrove needs to know anything about what I used to do. That's exactly how I wanted it." Vivian sat with that for a moment. "And tonight, that wanted it quiet plan got fairly dramatically broken," she said. "Tonight, my schedule got broken," Marcus said. "Eli has his first violin recital. He's been practicing the same 8 bars of a Vivaldi piece for 6 weeks, and he is, by his own assessment, extremely nervous and extremely proud, often within the same sentence." A small, genuine warmth entered his voice for the first time since the lobby. "I told him I'd be there. I don't break that promise. Not for a gala, not for 5 guys who thought a guy in a wrinkled jacket was an easy laugh." Vivian looked at him. "I'm sorry about that. Genuinely. Russo and the others, that's a culture problem on my security team that I've apparently been ignoring for longer than I should have. Confidence without humility gets people hurt eventually, and tonight it just happened to be them instead of someone who actually meant me harm. They're not bad at their jobs. I want to be fair about that. They reacted fast once it started. They just hadn't been tested by anyone who actually knew what they were doing in a long time, and that makes anyone sloppy. It's not unique to them. Vivian studied him for a moment. The specific generosity in that assessment, a man who'd just been mocked and physically threatened by 5 strangers offering them professional grace within minutes of putting them on the ground. You could have hurt them, badly, easily. I didn't need to, Marcus said simply. The goal was to get to the elevator I actually needed, not to make a point. Hurting them wouldn't have gotten me there any faster. It would have just made the next 20 minutes a lot worse for everyone, including me. The car pulled up outside Eli's school 7 minutes later, the lit windows of the auditorium glowing warm against the evening air, families streaming in through the front doors. "This is me," Marcus said. "Go. Go watch your son." He opened the door, then paused, looking back at her. "Thank you for the ride. You really didn't have to." "Mr. Webb, I run a logistics company. I spend my entire professional life evaluating whether the right people are in the right roles, doing work that actually uses what they're capable of. I think I just watched the most catastrophic underutilization of talent I've seen in years, and I'd like to talk to you again. Not tonight, not as an apology, but as an actual conversation about what you might want to do that isn't carrying garment bags." I handed him a card. "No pressure. Go watch the recital. Call me whenever you're ready, if you're ready at all." Marcus looked at the card for a moment, then at her. "Eli's playing Vivaldi," he said, almost to himself, a small smile breaking through. "I should go." "Go." He got out. He walked toward the lit doors of the school auditorium, and for a moment before he disappeared inside, he looked exactly like what he was. Not a former Special Forces operative who just disarmed 5 armed bodyguards in 10 seconds, but a father, slightly out of breath, hurrying to make sure he didn't miss the first note of his son's solo.
The auditorium smelled like floor wax, and the particular nervous energy of 200 parents pretending they weren't checking the time on their phones. Marcus slipped through the side door just as the lights dimmed for the pre-show announcements, and he scanned the rows fast. The same scanning instinct that had clocked 5 bodyguards' stance and posture in half a second, now reduced to a much gentler task, finding an empty seat before the program started. He spotted one near the aisle in the 3rd row, beside a woman in a cardigan juggling a toddler and a diaper bag, and he murmured an apology as he eased past her knees, garment bag free now, his jacket still slightly rumpled from the evening's unplanned detour. He sat. He exhaled. For the first time since Russo's hand had started toward his shoulder, his pulse settled into something resembling normal. He pulled out his phone, more out of habit than need, and saw a single text from the school's parent group chat, sent 20 minutes ago by someone named Denise, who organized the recital programs every year with the grim determination of a woman who had clearly been burned by missing deadlines before. Reminder: violin students perform in alphabetical order by last name. Webb is near the end of the first half. He felt a flicker of relief at that. He hadn't missed anything. He'd made it with room to spare, even after everything. He looked around for Eli's teacher, found Mrs. Castillo near the side stage door in a deep green dress, clipboard in hand, doing the specific harried triage of a music teacher trying to keep 11 nervous 10-year-olds calm in a holding room that undoubtedly smelled like rosin and flop sweat. He didn't see Eli yet. The kids were probably backstage, lined up by some makeshift order, trading the particular terror and excitement of a first public performance. The lights dimmed further. The program began. The first 3 students were second graders, recognizable from their size and the way their bows shook more than their actual playing required. Marcus watched with the patient, genuine attention he gave to all of it, not just his own son's turn, but every kid's turn, because he understood something about rooms like this that he'd learned slowly in the 4 years since Eli's mother died, and he'd had to relearn what it meant to actually be present somewhere instead of just physically occupying space while his mind ran tactical assessments of exits and threats. He thought,
while a small girl in a blue dress sawed gamely through Twinkle Twinkle with more enthusiasm than precision about the card in his jacket pocket. He hadn't looked at it again since Vivian Hale had pressed it in his hand outside the car. He didn't need to look at it to know what it represented. A door he hadn't known existed opened in the space of 10 seconds by men who'd underestimated him in a hotel lobby. He thought about Rousseau's face on the marble floor, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to a tired, familiar recognition. He'd seen that exact expression on other men in other rooms, men who had built their entire professional identity on a kind of swagger that worked right up until the moment it didn't, and who then had to sit with the specific disorientation of discovering the floor wasn't where they thought it was. He didn't think about it for long. That wasn't where his attention belonged tonight, and he was disciplined enough, had trained himself disciplined enough in the years since Sarah died, since he'd had to become the kind of father who showed up fully rather than the kind who showed up distracted, to keep the part of his brain that wanted to chew on the gala separate from the part of him sitting in a folding chair in a school auditorium waiting for his son. A fourth grader played a halting but determined ode to joy. A fifth grader, visibly more advanced, played something Marcus didn't recognize, but that drew a small ripple of impressed murmurs from the row behind him. Denise, the program organizer, stood near the front with a stopwatch expression, mouthing names to herself as she checked them off some internal list. Marcus checked his watch, 3 more students before the alphabet reached W. He thought, unbidden, about Sarah, about how she would have been the one organizing the carpool to get here, the one who remembered to bring tissues and a granola bar and the spare string in case Eli's E-string snapped mid-performance, the way it had during a practice session 2 weeks ago, sending Eli into a brief, dramatic 10-year-old crisis that Marcus had talked him down from with the patient, unglamorous repetition that parenting alone had taught him was 90% of the job. Sarah would have known exactly which seat to sit in for the best sightline. She would have cried unapologetically at every single kid's performance, not just their son's, because that was who she was, a woman who felt things in their full size without embarrassment, and who had taught Marcus over 9 years of marriage that there was no shame in caring visibly for small, ordinary, important things. He missed her in the specific way he always missed her at moments like this, not as a sharp current grief anymore, 4 years out, but as a quiet, persistent absence, a chair that should have had someone in it. He'd stopped expecting that feeling to disappear. He'd just learned to let it sit beside him instead of trying to push it away, the same way he'd learned to let Eli ask about her whenever he needed to, without flinching, without redirecting the conversation towards something easier. A fourth student took the stage, a boy with glasses who introduced his own piece with more confidence than the song itself contained, and Marcus glanced toward the side door again, hoping to catch a glimpse of his son in the wings. He saw him. Eli was standing just behind the curtain's edge, violin tucked under one arm, bow in the other hand, wearing the navy button-down they'd picked out together that morning after a brief and entirely good-natured argument about whether a stripe pattern read as too businessy for a 10-year-old. His hair, which Marcus had tried and somewhat failed to tame that morning, was doing its usual thing of refusing to lie flat on the left side. He looked small up there, smaller than he seemed at home, the particular optical trick that stages played on children, making them look both more exposed and more important than anywhere else. Eli's eyes were scanning the crowd, searching, the way Marcus had seen him search before, at soccer games, at the one piano recital he'd done 2 years ago before deciding violin suited him better, at the school assembly where he'd had to read a poem out loud to the whole gym. It was the look of a kid checking before doing the hard thing that the one non-negotiable witness was actually in the room. Marcus sat up slightly straighter, made sure he was visible past the heads of the people in front of him, and waited for his son's eyes to find his. The boy with the glasses finished his piece, to polite applause. Denise checked something off her list. Mrs. Castillo, near the stage door, put a steadying hand on Eli's shoulder and said something Marcus couldn't hear from the third row, something that made Eli nod once, the specific nod of a kid gathering himself. Next, we have Eli Webb performing a selection from Vivaldi's Spring. Eli stepped forward into the stage lights, and for 1/2 second before he found his footing, his face carried the visible, unguarded panic of a child realizing that 200 people were now looking directly at him and there was no curtain left to hide behind. Then his eyes swept the crowd one more time, fast, and landed on his father. Marcus didn't smile exactly. He gave the small, steady nod he'd practiced with Eli before every nerve-wracking thing the boy had ever had to do, the nod that meant, "I'm here, I see you, you don't need to be anyone but yourself." It was the same nod he'd given him before his first day of 3rd grade after they'd moved, before his first dentist appointment without his mother in the room, before every small, brave thing a kid had to do without quite knowing yet that he could. Eli's shoulders dropped fractionally. He lifted his violin to his chin, he found his bow hand position, and in the 1/2 second before the first note, Marcus watched his son's face shift from panic into something quieter and more deliberate, the specific concentration of someone who had practiced enough, 8 bars, 6 weeks, that his body knew what to do even when his nerves didn't.
Eli's solo was, in the specific, generous assessment of a parent who loved him completely, extraordinary. It was also, in the more technical assessment of an actual musician, a solid and clearly well-rehearsed 8 bars played by a 10-year-old who hit 2 notes slightly flat and recovered with a poise that made Marcus's chest tighten with a pride that had nothing to do with technical precision and everything to do with watching his son stand alone in front of 200 people and do the hard thing anyway. Marcus sat in the 3rd row, having arrived with 90 seconds to spare, and watched his son's eyes scan the crowd before the piece started, the specific searching look of a child checking, one more time, that the promise had been kept, that the person who said they'd be there was actually there. Their eyes met. Eli's shoulders dropped 1/2 inch, the visible release of tension that meant, "Okay, he's here. I can do this now." He played. He hit his 2 flat notes. He recovered. He finished, and the small auditorium erupted in the specific, overwhelming applause that parents give every single child at every single recital, regardless of technical merit, because the point was never really the music. Afterward, in the lobby, Eli found him in the crowd and barreled into him with the unrestrained physical enthusiasm of a 10-year-old who had just survived something terrifying and important. "Did you hear the flat notes?" Eli said immediately, pulling back, his face a mixture of pride and self-critical anxiety that Marcus recognized, with a small internal ache, as something he'd inherited directly from his father. "I heard you finish. I heard you not stop. That's the part that matters." "Mrs. Castillo said the same thing," Eli said, somewhat suspiciously, as though his father and his violin teacher might be colluding. "Mrs. Castillo's right. You were great, bud. I'm proud of you." Eli studied him for a second with the specific perceptiveness that 10-year-olds sometimes had, the kind that noticed things adults assumed were invisible. "You look weird, like something happened." Marcus thought about 5 bodyguards on a marble floor, about a CEO's business card now folded in his jacket pocket, and about an evening that had taken a turn he had not remotely planned for in the 11 minutes between dropping garment bags and watching his son play Vivaldi. "Something did happen," Marcus said. "I'll tell you about it on the way home. It's a good story." "Is it embarrassing?" Eli asked, with the specific hope of a child who loved hearing stories where his dad came out looking impressive. Marcus thought about Russo's face on the marble floor, about the silence of 200 gala guests, and about a CEO who'd stood in an elevator doorway and watched the whole thing with an expression of dawning recognition. "No," Marcus said, "not for me anyway." He called Vivian Hale on Monday morning, after a weekend spent thinking carefully about what he actually wanted, which was a different question than what he was capable of doing. The job she offered him, head of executive protection strategy for Hale Industries, overseeing not just her personal security but the broader operational security framework for a company with manufacturing and logistics operations spanning 14 countries, came with a salary that more than tripled what he made carrying garment bags, a schedule he negotiated personally and specifically around Eli's school hours and recital nights, and every single thing that actually mattered, and an explicit written understanding that he would never, under any circumstances, be required to travel during a week containing a scheduled school event without 30 days advance notice. Vivian agreed to every condition without negotiation. "You're not hiring me for my schedule flexibility," Marcus said on the phone, slightly suspicious of how easily she'd agreed.
I'm hiring you because I watched you handle 5 overconfident men with more restraint and precision than anyone on my payroll has shown in a decade. The schedule conditions tell me you know exactly what your priorities are, and you're not going to let the job erode them. That's not a weakness I'm accommodating, Mr. Webb. That's the exact quality I'm hiring. 6 months later, Russo, who had not been fired because Marcus had specifically and personally requested he not be, on the grounds that the man had reacted competently once the situation actually started and deserved better training rather than unemployment, was one of 40 security personnel sitting in a conference room listening to Marcus deliver a training session on situational assessment and de-escalation. The biggest threat to any protection detail isn't an armed attacker. It's your own certainty that you already know who's dangerous and who isn't, based on a jacket, a posture, a 5-second glance. The moment you stop actually looking at the person in front of you and start looking at the category you've already put them in, that's the moment you've made yourself sloppy. And sloppy gets people hurt. Russo, sitting in the third row, raised his hand. "Yeah," Marcus said, nodding at him with no trace of the satisfaction the moment could have carried. "I want to say something," Russo said, standing slightly, the specific discomfort of a proud man making himself vulnerable in front of his peers. 6 months ago, I laughed at this guy in a hotel lobby and called him lost. Then, he put all 5 of us on the ground in 10 seconds without breaking a sweat, and instead of having me fired, he got me better training." He looked around the room, then back at Marcus. "I just want everyone to understand the lesson he's teaching isn't theoretical. I lived it. I was an idiot, and he had every right to make my life difficult after, and he didn't. That's the actual lesson. Not just don't underestimate people. Be the kind of person who doesn't need to humiliate someone just because you had the chance." The room was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Russo," Marcus said simply, and moved on to the next slide. That evening, Marcus picked Eli up from school at his usual time, a schedule item that had survived every negotiation, every promotion, every condition Vivian had agreed without hesitation, and Eli climbed into the car with his violin case and his backpack and the specific exhausted satisfaction of a kid who'd had a good day. "Dad," Eli said as they pulled out of the school parking lot, "can you teach me the thing you did, the disarming thing?" Marcus glanced. "Where did you hear about that?" "Mrs. Castillo's husband was at the gala. He told her, she told the other teachers, somebody's kid told somebody at school. It's kind of a big deal, Dad." Marcus drove for a moment in silence, thinking about 10 seconds in a hotel lobby and a card in his jacket pocket that had turned into the best professional decision of his life, and about a 10-year-old in the passenger seat who was, more than any title or salary or recognition, the entire reason any of it mattered. "I'll teach you the parts that keep you safe, not the parts that make you feel tough. There's a difference, and it's important you understand it before I teach you anything." Eli considered this with the specific seriousness he brought to things. Marcus said carefully, "Okay, what's the difference?" "Being tough is about making other people feel small. Being safe is about making sure nobody, including you, gets hurt when it doesn't have to happen. The second one's the only one worth learning." Eli nodded slowly, processing it the way 10-year-olds processed things that mattered. Quietly, and in a way that would surface again later at an unexpected moment, fully understood. "Dad," Eli said after a minute. "Yeah, bud? I'm glad you came to my recital instead of staying for the fight stuff." Marcus glanced, something warm and settled moving through his chest. There was never a question, not for 1 second. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who looked at your surface and decided they already knew everything underneath, this story is for you. The quietest person in the room is sometimes the most capable one in it, and the things that actually matter, a recital seat kept warm, a promise kept, a child's eyes finding yours across a crowded room, those were never the things anyone was laughing at in the first place. Drop a comment and tell us about a time someone underestimated you completely. We read every single one. Subscribe for more stories like this every week. We'll see you next time.